They don't warn you about the kind of mistakes that come with paperwork. No shouting, no blood, just a signature, a stamp, and a train that keeps moving. Out here, in places that don't even show up on the map, trouble doesn't break in, it gets dropped off. Quiet, unclaimed. That afternoon, a freight train stopped at an abandoned rail station. No passengers, no receipt, just a woman left behind, and a file with no name. Ethan Cole stood there and did nothing. Because in places like this, the first step forward usually means you carry the weight forever. If this already feels uncomfortably familiar, stay with me. Like, share, and subscribe. This story might say more about us than we expect. Ethan Cole used to believe in doing things the right way, not the heroic way, the proper way. He believed in forms filled out clean, logs signed at the end of a shift, decisions made within the lines, because that's what kept people safe, or so he thought. Back then, Ethan trusted procedure more than instinct. If something went wrong, it meant someone skipped a step. If harm followed, it meant the rules weren't followed closely enough. That belief carried him through years of work. And it also left a trail behind him he stopped looking at. So when Mara was left at the station, Ethan didn't rush forward. He didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask who sent her, didn't even ask her name. To anyone watching, it might have looked like indifference, like a man choosing not to care. But that wasn't it. Ethan had learned, the hard way, that acting fast didn't always mean acting right. He had seen what happened when good intentions outran understanding, seen how meshing yourself into a situation you didn't fully grasp could make things worse, not better. He had signed papers once, clean signatures, legal approvals, all in order, and people still paid for it. So now, when trouble showed up without knocking, Ethan slowed down. He stood still. He let the silence settle before he moved. There was a time he would have filled the quiet with questions, demanded answers, raised his voice to prove he was doing something. He doesn't do that anymore, because he's seen how questions can cut deeper than blades, how a curious glance can feel like another hand closing around your throat, how being asked to explain your pain can reopen wounds that never had time to seal. That's why he didn't ask Mara what happened. Not because he didn't want to know, but because he understood that after everything she'd lost, the one thing still hers was the right not to explain. Ethan's silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate, like a fence built not to trap someone in, but to keep others out, like a line drawn to say nothing more will be taken here. He went back to his work, checked the rails, tested the locks, logged the time. Simple motions, repeated, familiar. Not to ignore her, but to show her the rhythm of a place where nothing sudden was required of her. Some men think strength is in stepping forward first, in filling space, in making themselves unavoidable. Ethan had learned a different kind of strength, the kind that waits, the kind that asks less, the kind that understands restraint can be a form of care. He wasn't cold, he was careful, and in a world that had already taken too much from her. Careful might have been the only safe place left to stand. Mara didn't tell her story. She watched. She learned the sounds of the place first. The way metal rang when Ethan tapped the rail with his wrench. The low groan of the old windmill when the air shifted. The hiss of coal catching fire in the rusted furnace. Ethan didn't ask her anything. Not the first night, not the second, not after. They moved around each other carefully, like two people sharing a narrow bridge from opposite ends. Enough space to pass, enough distance not to touch. In the mornings. Ethan checked the tracks. He walked the line slow, counting bolts, tightening what had come loose, the same routine, every day. Mara sat on the steps and watched, not because she was curious, because stillness felt safer than sleep. At night, the station settled into itself. No trains, no voices, just the ticking of an old pocket watch Ethan kept in his coat, counting seconds nobody else seemed to need. They didn't eat together. Food was left where it could be reached. Water filled without a word. There were no promises made, no reassurance offered, and somehow, that was the first thing that didn't hurt. Days passed. Mara started moving when Ethan was already busy, sweeping dust from the far corner, sorting scrap metal into neat piles, doing small things that didn't draw attention. Ethan noticed. He didn't comment. When a lock jammed on the outer gate, he fixed it before she asked. When the furnace smoked too heavy, he cleaned the vent before it filled the room. No announcements, no explanations, just quiet adjustments. Once, she dropped a cup. It shattered loud against the concrete floor. Mara froze. Ethan didn't turn around right away. He finished tightening the bolt in his hand, set the tool down, then stepped back far enough to give her room. He didn't say it was okay, didn't rush to help. After a moment, Mara picked up the pieces herself. That was how things worked between them. Not closeness, not distance. Respect measured in steps not taken. At dusk, the wind picked up. Dust rolled across the tracks like a low tide. Ethan stood by the signal post, checking the chain that kept it locked in place. Mara watched from the doorway. For the first time, she spoke. "Does anything ever come through here?" Ethan paused. He didn't answer right away. "Not anymore," he said. She nodded. That was enough. What grew between them wasn't trust. Not yet. It was something quieter. The understanding that nothing would be taken without permission, that silence wouldn't be used as leverage, that no one was keeping score. Ethan kept his distance on purpose, not because he didn't feel the pull to step closer, but because he knew how often closeness had been used as a trap. He stayed where he was, fixed what needed fixing, left the rest untouched. Mara noticed the pattern, the consistency, the way days passed without demands. Safety didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, in the lock that stayed shut, in the questions never asked, in the space that was always there when she needed it. Some people think care means reaching out, holding on, pulling someone back from the edge. But sometimes, care is knowing where not to stand. Sometimes, respect isn't about moving closer. It's about choosing, again and again, not to cross a line that doesn't belong to you. And in that abandoned station, surrounded by rust and quiet, two people learned how to exist in the same space without hurting each other any further. Would you have known when to stop? The ledger was tucked where Ethan hadn't touched in years. Bottom shelf, behind a warped toolbox, pages stuck together from old moisture and coal dust. He didn't go looking for answers. He was fixing a hinge. The book fell on its own. Old paper, faded ink, dates written by a steadier hand than the man holding it now. Ethan sat on the floor and turned the pages slowly. Train numbers, cargo codes, routes that no longer existed. And then one entry caught, a shipment logged years ago, cleared, approved. No notes, no flags, just a signature. His. No blood on the page, no screams trapped in the ink, just clean lines and a red stamp pressed hard enough to leave an imprint on the next sheet. That's how it usually is. People like to imagine evil as loud, violent, easy to spot. But this kind didn't break doors or raise its voice. It wore proper language, moved through offices, waited patiently for everyone to do their part. Ethan stared at that page longer than he should have. He remembered the day, not the faces, not the cargo, just the routine. A request came through. Papers were in order. No reason to slow it down. He'd signed because that was his job, because nothing looked wrong enough to stop the process, because stopping things without cause came with consequences of its own. That train moved on schedule, and so did he. The system didn't ask him to be cruel. It didn't ask him to hate anyone. It only asked him not to interfere. And he didn't. Mara stood in the doorway behind him. She hadn't made a sound. Ethan didn't turn around right away. The clock in his pocket ticked once, twice. "You don't have to explain," she said. He closed the book. "I wasn't planning to," he answered. Silence settled between them again, thicker this time. Ethan understood something then that had taken him years to name. The worst damage isn't done by people who enjoy hurting others. It's done by people who convince themselves they're just doing their job. No knives, no chains, just procedures passed hand to hand until no one feels responsible anymore. That red stamp on the page hadn't been placed by a villain. It was placed by someone tired, someone busy, someone who believed the system would catch what he didn't. It didn't. Mara didn't ask what the book meant. She didn't need to. Some truths announced themselves without words. Ethan stood and carried the ledger back to the table, set it down where it could be seen. Not hidden, not locked away. Outside, the wind shifted. The signal chain rattled once against the post, then went still. Ethan knew now why the weight had followed him all these years. Why the quiet never fully settled. The system hadn't failed because it was broken. It failed because it worked exactly as designed. It didn't require monsters, just enough people willing to look down at their hands and say, "I did my part." He looked at Mara. For the first time, he didn't step back. "If I'd known," he said. She met his eyes. Didn't soften. "That's the thing," she replied. "You never do. Not all of it." She turned away and walked back toward the tracks. Ethan stayed where he was, staring at the ledger. Because some evils don't come from what we choose to do. They come from what we decide not to stop. And once you see that, there's no unseeing it. How many things have you signed off on? Just because everything looked normal, Ethan didn't sleep that night. The ledger stayed on the table like a loaded gun. Quiet, patient. The wind kept brushing the tin roof, and every time it did, the station sounded like it was breathing. Near dawn. Ethan took the old pocket watch from his coat, flipped it open, listened to it tick. Same rhythm, same pace, like it didn't care what a man carried. He stepped outside and walked the track line, not because it needed walking, because his feet needed something to do. The rails were cold, the bolts were tight, the locks were still where he'd left them. Everything looked normal. That's what scared him. By mid-morning, Mara was up, standing near the furnace, hands wrapped around a tin cup. She didn't look at the ledger. She didn't have to. Ethan set a wrench down beside the book, then another tool, then another, like he was building a small wall out of metal and guilt. "I can leave," he finally said. Mara's eyes lifted just enough to meet his. No comfort there, no anger either. Just truth. "Where would you go?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer, because he knew the answer. He'd been running for years, not across states, not on horseback, just in smaller ways. By keeping quiet, by staying out of town, by living in a place nobody cared to find. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know," he said. Mara's mouth tightened at that. Not like it was new, like she'd heard it in 100 different voices. "I believe you," she said. Then she added, "That doesn't change anything." The words landed plain and heavy. Ethan nodded once, like a man accepting a sentence. Most people think making things right is a moment, a confession, a dramatic apology, a single good deed that wipes the slate clean. That's not how it works. Some wrongs don't come with a receipt. They don't come with an undo button. They come with years. And the real test isn't whether you can say you're sorry. It's whether you can live like you're responsible even when nobody's watching. Ethan didn't ask Mara for forgiveness. He didn't even reach for it. He picked up the ledger and walked it to the storage room, not to hide it, to keep it safe. Then he went back outside and got to work. He replaced a cracked tie, dug out old spikes, lifted heavy steel until his shoulders burned. Mara watched him from the doorway. Hours passed. At one point, Ethan's hand started to shake from the strain. He paused, wiped sweat from his brow, and kept going anyway. Not because it would impress her, not because it would balance anything, because it was the only honest thing left. Late in the afternoon, Mara stepped closer to the track line. Not too close, just enough to speak without raising her voice. "You think working yourself into the ground fixes it?" she asked. Ethan kept his eyes on the rail. "No," he said. "It just keeps me from pretending it didn't happen." Mara stood there a moment longer, then turned away. Ethan watched her go, and he understood something that hurt worse than the truth in that book. He wasn't owed relief. He wasn't owed peace. And he sure wasn't owed her mercy. If he was going to stay, it would be like this. Day after day. Small, quiet choices. A life built around accountability. Because some mistakes can't be erased. They can only be carried. And if you've ever done something you can't take back, would you rather disappear or spend the rest of your life trying to live it right? Mara didn't forgive him. Not that day, not the next. And that wasn't cruelty. It was honesty. She woke before sunrise and took work where she could find it. Sorting scrap, hauling coal, doing jobs that kept her hands busy and her mind quiet. Some days she stayed near the station. Some days she walked past the tracks and didn't look back. Ethan never asked which kind of day it was. He kept his distance the same way he always had. Not as punishment, as respect. There were moments he wanted to say something, to explain, to promise things he had no right to promise. He swallowed those words and let them die where they stood. Because forgiveness isn't something you earn by standing close. Mara learned the shape of her days again. Not all at once, in pieces. Some mornings she woke steady. Other mornings the sound of metal clanging sent her heart racing. On those days, she stepped outside, let the wind hit her face, counted her breaths until her body remembered where it was. Healing didn't move forward in a straight line. It doubled back. It stalled. It surprised her. And for the first time, no one told her she was doing it wrong. No one asked her to be grateful. No one asked her to hurry up and be whole. She chose when to speak. She chose when to stay silent. She chose how close anyone was allowed to stand. That choice mattered more than kindness ever had. One evening, she found Ethan by the tracks, fixing a loose chain on the signal post. The light was fading fast. "You think I owe you forgiveness," she said. Ethan didn't turn around. "No," he replied. "I think you owe yourself the truth." She considered that. "Truth doesn't make things easier," she said. "No," he answered. "It just makes them yours." They stood there without moving. Mara wasn't looking for closure. She wasn't looking for peace. She was looking for control over something that had been taken from her, and forgiveness, she knew, wouldn't give her that. People like to talk about forgiveness as if it's a finish line. Cross it, and everything behind you disappears. But some pain doesn't want to be erased. It wants to be acknowledged, respected. Mara chose not to forgive because forgiveness felt like surrender, like letting the past decide the shape of her future. She wasn't ready for that. Maybe she never would be. And that didn't make her broken. It made her honest. Ethan accepted that without argument. He didn't shrink away, didn't push forward. He stayed where he was, doing the work that needed doing, day after day. Not to be seen, not to be redeemed, just because responsibility doesn't end when the story gets quiet. Some nights, Mara watched him from a distance. The way he moved slower now, more deliberate. She saw a man who wasn't asking to be forgiven, only choosing not to run. That mattered. Not enough to change what had happened, but enough to let her breathe. Forgiveness may come later, or it may not come at all. And for once, that choice belonged to her. Healing doesn't mean letting go of your anger. It means deciding what you're willing to carry and what you refuse to give back. Mara walked toward the station, then stopped short. She didn't look at Ethan. "I'm staying," she said. "For now." Ethan nodded once. Nothing more. No embrace, no resolution. Just two people standing in the truth they couldn't change. And sometimes, that's the bravest ending there is. If someone hurt you and never earned your forgiveness, would you still allow yourself to live on your own terms? Ethan stayed at the station. Same mornings, same work, same quiet. He checked the rails before sunrise, oiled the joints that screamed when the cold set in, replaced what time had loosened. Nothing dramatic changed. That was the point. Mara watched him for a while longer, some days from the doorway, some days from farther down the track. She didn't owe him a decision. Not yet. The station didn't ask questions either. It just stood there, holding the weight of what had passed through it. Weeks moved by. The ledger stayed where Ethan left it. Not hidden, not displayed, just present. A reminder that some truths don't need announcing. They only need acknowledging. Mara learned she could leave at any time. No one would stop her. No one would follow. That knowledge mattered. So did the fact that Ethan didn't try to make her stay. There was no speech, no plea, no offer of a future that hadn't been earned. He understood now that staying was his responsibility. Leaving was hers. One evening, the sky turned the color of rust. Wind ran low along the tracks, carrying dust and the faint smell of coal. Mara stood beside the rail, looking down its length. "Trains ever come back here?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not unless someone fixes what's broken," he said. She nodded, like she already knew that. She didn't tell him whether she'd go or stay. She didn't need to. What mattered was that the choice was hers. Ethan watched her walk back toward the station, then stop halfway. Stand still. Breathe. He didn't move. He'd learned the difference between being present and being entitled. No one walked away clean in this story. No one got to forget. But they weren't running anymore. Ethan understood something he hadn't before. That adulthood isn't about erasing the past. It's about living honestly beside it. You don't get lighter. You get steadier. You don't get forgiven by the world. You forgive yourself enough to keep going. Mara turned back and met his eyes from a distance. No smile. No anger. Just recognition. The truth stood between them. Untidy. Unresolved. And still survivable. That night, the pocket watch ticked on. The chain by the signal post stayed locked. the station held. Some people think the brave choice is to disappear after you've done wrong, change your name, find a quieter place. But there's another kind of courage, the kind that stays, the kind that shows up every day and lives carefully with what it knows. So here's the question this story leaves you with. If you once signed off on something you can't undo, would you vanish and hope time forgets you? Or would you stay, accept the weight, and try to live right anyway? If this story spoke to something you've carried, share it. Sometimes growing up isn't about moving on. It's about staying where the truth can still find you.